Welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay, aka OMG Tarot. So here we are, January 30th, and there is a lot happening. Yesterday was Lunar New Year, and it's officially the Year of the Snake. We also had a new moon in Aquarius last night, and it's Imbolc this Saturday. We're also about a third of the way through Aquarius season, which brings me to my last point. It's my birthday tomorrow! I know I've mentioned on the pod before that I'm an Aquarius sun, and yes, your favorite card-slinging Aquarius turns 35 tomorrow. That means I'm old enough to run for president in the United States, but don't worry, if I ever do become the president, I'll still keep podcasting. Today's topic piggybacks on the birthday theme. Previously, in a poll on an episode that was kind of a while ago now, probably last spring or last summer, a bunch of you voted that you'd like to hear more about astrology on this podcast. So, I'm going to do a very basic, high-level overview of your natal chart and how you can interpret it to learn a bit more about yourself. I'm also going to pull tarot in and show you some cool ways that you can find cards that speak to different elements of you. Basically, your sun sign, your moon sign, all that kind of good stuff. Last, I'm also going to share with you one of my favorite tarot formulas that sort of ties in with our year ahead spread that we did a couple weeks ago, but this one is a lot more personal. Rather than looking at the year as a whole, it looks more at what is your year as an individual going to look like, namely, what will be the biggest themes of this year for you and the lessons that you'll learn. And that's a spread that I like to do as a birthday gift for others. Think of it like a mini personalized year ahead spread. And even though this episode's coming out in January, let's say your birthday is May 10th. If you were to do this spread for yourself on May 10th, 2025, I'd typically read it as a reading of the year that you were that age. Let's say, for argument's sake, you're 30 this year. So I would read it as the lessons that you'll learn between May 10th, 2025 and May 10th, 2026. In essence, year 30 for you, not necessarily a January to December year, but your personal solar return. And I suppose that brings us to one of the first points I want to make, which is the idea of a solar return. Astrology is full of returns, and astrology is full of terms that, if you don't know what they mean, it can be very easy to become overwhelmed and confused. That's one thing that I know I've encountered in studying astrology and in teaching it, is that unlike tarot, where you can open up a deck of cards and really get going straight out of the box, astrology feels like there's a lot of vocabulary to learn and internalize and understand before you're even ready to get started with a chart. Once you have a basic astrology vocabulary, you'll see that it's actually very logical, in a lot of ways more logical than tarot. In fact, one analogy that I really like to use with my students is that tarot is liberal arts and astrology is STEM. There are formulas, there are angles, there are calculations, and in this season, I'm actually going to be talking more about astrology than I did last season. I'm also planning on having a few more guests who are astrologers and can talk about the things that I'm not an expert on. So, a return. What is a return in astrology? All it is when a planet completes its cycle around the sun through all 12 zodiac signs and returns to where it is in your natal chart. You might be familiar with the concept of the Saturn return, and that's exactly what that is. It's where Saturn has now gone through every single sign and spent about 29 years doing so, because Saturn is pretty far out from the sun, but Saturn has come back to where it was when you were born. Other planets that are a lot closer to the sun make returns more frequently, and when the sun has gone through all 12 zodiac signs and returns to where it was on the day you were born, it's your solar return. It's your birthday. And as far as what that actually means astrologically, well, when a planet completes its return, it's a sense of completion for you. And more specifically, it's a sense of completion in the area that that planet symbolizes, and in the house and sign of where it's placed in your natal chart. This is why a return can look very different from person to person. Let's talk about the Saturn return, because that's the one that everybody seems to know. Saturn is the planet that symbolizes responsibility and self discipline and aging up, but specifically the growing wiser part of growing older. It's not just chronologically, although there is a sense of chronological growth in Saturn. Think of themes like Father Time, but it's the wisdom that comes with aging and developing and shifting your insight to the world around you. That's across the board. Saturn always means that, regardless of who you are. But then the sign that Saturn is in your chart shows your personal approach to all those Saturnian themes. In my chart, it's in Capricorn, which means that it's in domicile, which means that it's in the sign that it rules. So if you have Mars in Aries, Venus in Taurus, Mercury in Gemini, basically if you have a planet in the sign that it rules, that means that that planet is very comfortable in your chart. You have an easy time with that planet's energy because you have a relationship with it that's just very natural and fits closely with what that planet does. So a Saturn in Capricorn is somebody who has no problem taking responsibility. It comes easily to them. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but a person with Saturn in Capricorn tends to have a very simple relationship with things like self-discipline and responsibility because that's just a way of life for them. Now, there is a caveat, and if you have other aspects in your chart, like something squaring or opposing, or really otherwise kind of muting out that Saturn in Capricorn, I guess is a good layperson's way to put it, you might not necessarily feel this energy as strongly. But typically, if you've got Saturn in Capricorn, your approach to leveling up and self discipline is one of, well, I've been waiting for this my whole life. I already know how to be the adult in the room. And they say that people with this placement may sometimes feel like they age backwards, that they might have been a very responsible child, and then as they become an adult, they kind of loosen the reins a little bit and cut themselves some slack. I've heard it called the Benjamin Button placement. Let's say, for comparison's sake, you had Saturn in Cancer. Cancer is the exact opposite of Capricorn. It's, if you put it on your natal chart, you'll notice Cancer is exactly on the other side of Capricorn. Wherever it is, they're opposite each other. And this means that they have the inverse traits of each other. Think of it like looking in a mirror or the opposite side of the coin. While Capricorn strives to succeed in the world and build a strong reputation for themselves and is very concerned with how they're viewed and respected in the community, Cancer's primary focus is building the best home for themselves possible. They direct their energy inward, and Cancer is not concerned with their reputation out in the world at all, because for them, their inner world is far more fascinating and far more important. They're not trying to win the popularity contest or be the best in their category or anything like that. And so somebody with Saturn in Cancer may approach themes of self-discipline and responsibility with a sense of going inward and a responsibility to cultivate a happy, harmonious, comfortable place for themselves, so that way they get to retreat from the world and they have somewhere safe to go to when they feel like everything is a bit much and a bit crazy. And also because I don't want to just toot my own horn and act like, oh, my placement is so great. There are negatives to every placement. Saturn and Capricorn, they suck the fun out of the room. They act like Squidward. But anyway, when Saturn has its return and gets back to the spot that it was in your natal chart, that typically feels like a leveling up in that area. You might feel like now your perspective has shifted and now you feel like you've grown and you've developed more wisdom and you feel driven to take responsibility in the manner that the sign you have Saturn in tends to do that, and also in the area of your life that's the house that you have that placement. For me, as a Scorpio rising, that's my third house. So you can interpret that as changing how I speak, how I think, how I interact with small groups, and feeling like I'm leveling up in that area and becoming more of a commanding presence, more of a boss, more of an ambitious Capricorny individual. If you have Saturn in, say, your 10th house, this could align with a big promotion or changing careers to something that's way more aligned with what you're actually good at and what you're passionate about. Returns work the same way with other planets. A Venus return, and remember, Venus is the planet that's all about love and value, could mean taking a closer look at What do you love? What do you value? Who's in your life? Who's important to you? And for a quick example, let's say that you have Venus in Aries, and let's say it's in the sixth house. Venus in Aries is Venus that loves passionately, brightly, but may have a tendency to burn out. Because remember, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, so they're the one who kicks things off and gets things going. Aries makes an excellent drill sergeant because Aries is motivated and Aries is passionate and Aries loves so bigly and so strongly, and oh boy, they're shouting in my face. But they're shouting because they love you, and that's how they express their love. They express it vibrantly and perhaps even a bit explosively. So for this person, that Aries Venus return might be a return to looking at, am I really dumping all of my bright, shiny passion into something that's serving me? Am I getting out of this relationship what I'm putting into it? Because I know I'm giving 110%. And with it in the sixth house, that's the house of routines and your day-to-day and your health and well-being, both physical and mental. So your Aries Venus return in the sixth house might have you examining, what is the day-to-day in this relationship? Should we move in together? Should we break up? How is this relationship impacting my mental and physical health? And is this a routine that's healthy for me? So how do you know what your placements are? Beyond your sun, of course, because I think we probably all know our sun sign. Here's how. Get your natal chart. It's free and it's easy. If you use an app like CoStar, you already have it and you have all your placements organized into a nice, neat table for you. Alternatively, there are a bunch of websites where you can do it. My personal favorite is AstroSeek because I feel like it offers a lot of really good resources and it's a clean interface, it's accurate, it's very simple. I like it. That's Astro, ASTRO, Seek, SEEK.com. Once you're there, select the drop-down for free horoscopes, and then choose the very first one, Free Natal Chart Online Calculator. On the following page, input your time, place, and location of birth. If you don't know what time you were born, and a lot of people don't, you can choose time unknown, and what happens is you're not going to get your rising sign or your houses. You'll still see which sign each of the planets were in when you were born, and if you have an approximate time frame, try plugging in different times, because what the time of birth does is it determines which zodiac sign was on the horizon when you were born, hence the name rising sign. And your rising sign is always the sign ruling your first house, and then whichever sign that is, that determines the rest of your chart because they go in order. If you're an Aries rising, your second house is ruled by Taurus, your third house is ruled by Gemini, so on and so forth. So if you say have an approximate 2-hour window through which you think you were born, try just plugging it in 8 a.m., 8:15, 8:30, and see how that changes the rising sign, because the same sign might be present for that whole time frame, especially if it's a rather short time frame. This isn't an absolutely foolproof method, but it's one that I've used to narrow down what somebody's rising sign likely is. So all right, last step before you click generate, go down to the part where it has house system, it's a drop-down menu, and choose whole sign. Now you don't have to, but there are all different ways of calculating your house system, and whole sign is the one that I use. It's one that a lot of astrologers use, and if you're fairly new to natal charts, it's just the most straightforward and simple. Don't overthink things. Even if you're not new to astrology, whole sign, I like whole sign. So then, click generate, and you should be looking at a circular graphic that has a bunch of little glyphs and a bunch of colored lines in the middle, and all the zodiac signs around the outer rim. This is your natal chart. Scroll down and you'll see a write-up of which sign each of your planets are in. Or if you know what the glyphs look like, you can find them in the chart. This is why I prefer to run a circular natal chart versus something like CoStar, because I like to see where all the planets are in relation to each other. Table style, like what CoStar gives you, is perfectly fine if you're not looking for all of those angles and relations. Like if you just want what planet is in what sign, CoStar delivers exactly what you need. But I personally, also, I've been doing it this way since before CoStar existed, so maybe it's just a force of habit. Your natal chart is a plethora of information about you, and it's really fun to pore over. And if you're looking for a good read about interpreting your natal chart, I highly recommend the book Astrology for Yourself by Demetra George and Douglas Block. It's one of my personal favorites. So I'm not going to go over every single planet because we'll be here all day, and this podcast isn't that long. But let's talk about your big three. Your big three are your sun, your moon, and your rising. These three are considered the most important placements in your chart because in a lot of ways they set the tone for all of your other placements. Your sun, you know what your sun sign is. It's the one that when people ask, what's your sign? It's the one everybody knows. I'm an Aquarius sun because the sun is in Aquarius from about January 20th through about February 20th. So if your birthday falls during that time frame, you are an Aquarius sun. In astrology, the sun is the core of who you are. It's the energy that radiates through every single other placement in your chart. So, at my core, I exhibit Aquarian traits. Aquarius is an air sign. I know a lot of people assume it's a water sign. It's not. And it's a fixed sign. We can get more into what those two terms mean in another episode, but here I want to stay focused on what an Aquarius sun is like. Your sun sign's energy radiates outward. When people get to know you, they get to know all of those traits of your sun sign. So for an Aquarius, I know probably the most common trait that people like to throw around is humanitarian, and others are things like stoic, aloof, forward-thinking, progressive. We could rattle off traits all day, but that's not very interesting. But my point is, that's how the sun operates in your natal chart. The moon is the inverse of that. The moon is what you bring inward. It's your inner emotional world, and it's how you emotionally process the experiences that you have. It could also be your intuition, and how do you engage with your intuition? Basically, how do you feel? Not just how do you feel emotionally, but literally, how do you feel the things around you and take in the things that can't be seen? For me, my moon is in Aries. So I approach those things with Aries traits like those that we talked about a bit earlier when we were discussing Aries Venus. Then your rising sign, which is the sign that's ruling your first house, is your ego. It's what is your perspective on the world and your perception of yourself. How do you navigate the world? What's the vibe that you give off? As I mentioned earlier, I'm a Scorpio rising, so I may give off Scorpio vibes initially. I may also tend to move through the world and engage with it in that very transformative, intense Scorpio way. So how does tarot fit into this? Because this is a tarot podcast. Well, one way that you can engage with your natal chart through tarot is to take a look at the cards that correspond to the signs that are your big three. Understanding these cards more deeply can give you additional insight into how these signs operate in your chart. So for example, I'm an Aquarius sun. So my sun sign can be summarized with the star. If you haven't listened, go back and listen to the episode about the star card. It was the second one I published, and ideally my audio sounds way better now. But the star is all about thinking outside the box and making things better after a revolution. The star comes right after the tower, so while the tower levels everything and brings you back to a blank slate, the star is what you build on that blank slate. The star is how you re-envision what you're doing and what your goals are for the future. And my sun, the core of my personality that radiates outward, is all of that. It's this idea of how do we make better? How do we give back to humanity? And also, maybe, a recognition that you're standing on the water, you're not standing in the water, and maybe you're not really engaging with the people who you claim to be serving. Moving on, the moon. My moon's in Aries. So we can go take a look over at the card that's associated with Aries, which is the Emperor. So what is my inner emotional world? Well, it's driven. It is the rule setter. It's the one who sets out on what they're after and goes for it. It's the commander. It's passionate, it's explosive, it's all of those fiery Aries things, which, as a contrast to a cool, collected, somewhat detached Aquarius, my inner world is explosive, it's passionate, I've got a lot going on under the hood that isn't always apparent from above the hood. Or is it? Because if your rising sign is the vibe you give off, my rising sign is Scorpio, and that's death. That doesn't mean I go through the day to day trying to kill everyone, but perhaps it means I give off an intensity, or that I tend to view myself as an intense, transformative person. Ask the people closest to you about the vibe that you give off, because I think this is a far more accurate way to assess your rising sign and how it manifests. Their answers might surprise you. To know which card is associated with each sign, you could go back and listen to every single episode of the Major Arcana, but I'll save you the trouble. Aries is the Emperor, Taurus is the Hierophant, Gemini is the Lovers, Cancer is the Chariot, Leo is Strength, Virgo is the Hermit, Libra is Justice, Scorpio is Death, Sagittarius is Temperance, Capricorn is the Devil, Aquarius is the Star, and Pisces is the Moon. All the major arcana cards that I haven't mentioned are associated with planets, and if you want to go a little bit further, take a look at those planets in your chart and see how they line up with the different tarot cards. And if you want to go a step further than that, take a look at which minor arcana cards line up with your other planetary placements. So for example, let's say you have Venus in Aries. The card for this is the Four of Wands. Maybe we'll talk a bit more about the minor arcana's astrological associations in a future episode. Next up, that mini personalized year ahead spread that I mentioned. This one's not even really a spread, it's more of a formula, and I can't take credit for it. I learned it from another book that I really love to recommend, and this one's called Tarot for Yourself. It's by Mary K. Greer. It's an excellent book for anybody who's just learning the tarot, or anybody who's been working with the tarot for a while and wants to take their practice a little bit further. One thing that she does a lot in this book is use tarot for self-reflection, so if you want to use your deck to learn more about yourself, this is a great book for it. So the formula is super easy. Add the month you were born with the day you were born with the current year. So for me, this is 1 plus 31 plus 2025. The sum is 257. Then you add the digits of the sum together, so 2 plus 5 plus 7. This turns out to 14. So then you find the corresponding major arcana card with that number, which for me is Temperance. That means that this year, from my birthday in 2025 to my birthday in 2026, is going to be marked by temperance themes. It will be a year of balance and harmony, and a lighter, flowier, more adventurous energy, because temperance is associated with Sagittarius, and Sagittarius, the archer, is the adventurer of the zodiac. And you'll notice year by year, your cards will mostly go in order. So last year was a death year for me. Then I now have temperance. But eventually the formula reaches the point where they no longer go in order. And in the book, there's an exercise where you plot all of the years of your life on a chart. So you can see where do the cards start over and which years are going to have similar themes to each other. It really is a neat book, and I assure you I don't have an affiliate link or anything for it. I just really, really like it. And when you plot the different years of your life, I think it's kind of neat to look back on years that have passed and see which card you pulled for that year and compare that with the experiences that you had that year. It's really not unlike doing your year ahead spread and then looking back on it at the end of the year. So check it out, it's a fun thing to do. And if you want to input the year that you were born, the resulting card is essentially your big picture lessons for this life. So when I put in the year I was born, mine reduces down to a 6. So the Lovers. Maybe themes of communication and connection with others. And speaking of reducing it down, what if you get a double-digit number like I got this year with 14? Should you reduce it down further? You can if you want to. Essentially, that means that you have two cards of the year, and it can be helpful to look at both of them and see how they relate to each other and how their themes might overlap or contrast. So if we reduce down our 14, 1 plus 4, we get 5. So my two cards for this year are the Hierophant and Temperance. Now, for me personally, I would give Temperance a little more significance in this because that's what it initially came to with the formula. I didn't naturally arrive at a 5. However, the 5 is there, so I would read it as this year of my life is going to be a lot of those themes of harmony and balance and going the distance, all of those temperance things. But there's also going to be an undercurrent of sticking to the rules and upholding tradition and maybe even teaching. Perhaps I'll be doing more teaching this year or looking back toward a teacher or a mentor that I have had in the past. That's who the Hierophant is. It's a fun one to do for yourself, and it's also a fun one to give out as a birthday gift. So that's about all I have for you today. Thanks for listening, and I hope you learned something valuable. As always, if you want to keep up with me, give me a follow over on Instagram. My handle is its_omg_tarot. You can also check out my website and read my blog there. It's omgtarot.com, and if you're not subscribed to the show yet, subscribe, because that's how you'll know every single time a new episode drops, which is on Thursdays, by the way. So, yeah, subscribe, give me a review, give me a follow, hang out with me. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.